Well, good morning. I'm expecting that everybody's going to be awake and with me this morning. You all got an extra hour of sleep, right? So I'm expecting you're going to be right there, no snoring. I hope you had a good night, and I hope you did get an extra hour of sleep and didn't just stay up later like we did and allowed our kids to do, thinking that they'd sleep in, and that theory never works. But nonetheless, I'm glad to be here with you. Hey, Wednesday night here at Pioneer Drive, our Fall Family Fun Night, it was a tremendous night. And yeah, we had rain, but we're flexible. We made it work. We still had, I think it's safe to say, and not just ministerially speaking, thousands on our campus through our doors. And it's crazy, but let me just tell you, seeing the smile on children's faces, seeing families having a free place to come and hang out and be together as a family is so important, and it's a gift to our community. And so I'm thankful if you brought candy, if you volunteered to work a booth, you brought your family up here, thank you. It was a great night seeing different generations interact, people from all walks of life on our campus. It was a great night, and so thank you. If you weren't a part of it next year, I hope you'll make plans to be a part of it, or this year, I hope you'll make plans to be a part of it next year. It's really important, and it's not for church people. It's not for you. It's for our community. It's to bless our community. And I hope you benefit too, but it's an outreach. It's an awesome opportunity. So thank you for that great night on Wednesday. Thanks to our production and our tech teams, our worship team, man, they did a great job. Craig's been on vacation. He's out, but Jordan stepped in. She did a tremendous job. If you don't know Brad, he's standing where about where I am. He was our first worship leader, a little bit of gathering history for about 2.5 years before he went off to med school. Now he's a pediatrician here in town, but he does a great job, our whole team, and I'm thankful to them. We're looking for more volunteers here at the gathering. Fill out that card in front of you, check you're willing to volunteer, we'll contact you and put you to work. But we are looking for more folks to plug in. We're in a series entitled The Story. We've been here for several weeks. We're going to be here until Easter, so get used to it. That's where we're going to be. We're walking through the Bible and the overarching story of the Bible. Today we're going to be in the story of Ruth. We've looked at creation, we've looked at fall, we've looked at redemption, how God was trying to bring it all back together through a man named Abraham. We looked at the people going to Egypt. We've looked at them wandering in the wilderness. You can always go catch up online, pioneerdrive.org, or catch the app. If you missed a sermon or two, it's there. We're going to watch this video on the book of Ruth this morning. It tells it in a more succinct way than I could, so let's turn our attention to the screens and watch as we hear the story of Ruth unfold.
In chapter 1, we learn about where Ruth came from. A man named Elimelech marries a woman named Naomi in the town of Bethlehem. They have 2 sons, and they all travel to Moab during a famine. Elimelech dies, and the 2 sons marry women from Moab. One marries Orpah, the other marries Ruth. Those 2 men die in Moab, and Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem. Orpah returns to her family, but Ruth travels with Naomi back to Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, Ruth gleans in the fields of a man named Boaz. He is a righteous man who sees her and gives her additional food and water, and asks her to only work in his fields so that she can be safe and well taken care of. Ruth goes home, tells Naomi of what happened, and Naomi agrees that she should stay in those fields because Boaz is actually a close relative of theirs. So Ruth gleaned in Boaz's crops until the end of the harvest. Naomi and Ruth have a discussion about Ruth getting married again. Naomi suggests that she marry Boaz and tells her to go to him that night and talk to him about it. Ruth does as Naomi says and approaches Boaz after he's done working. She asks him to redeem her family and to marry her, and Boaz responds that there is one other person who should do that. He says, if he does, that is a good thing. If he isn't willing, then I will surely redeem you. Chapter 4 begins with Boaz at the city gates, looking for the man that is to redeem Ruth's family. He finds him and asks him to sit down to talk. Boaz then finds 10 elders of the city, asking them to be part of this conversation as witnesses. Boaz turns to the man and explains the situation. Naomi, who has returned from Moab, is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would let you know so you can buy it here in the presence of the elders. If you won't do it, tell me, because I will if you won't." The Redeemer says he will, and Boaz responds, "One more thing. The day you buy the land, you also will acquire Ruth, the Moabite widow, in order to continue the name of her former husband, Mahlon." Boaz says here that this Redeemer will have to take Ruth as a wife, and their firstborn son will continue the name of Elimelech and Mahlon, not his own. This will result in the child receiving the land as an inheritance, rather than this Redeemer's own children. The man realizes this and changes his mind. "I cannot redeem it. I would not want to affect my own children's inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself." The man removes the sandal as a visual confirmation of the transaction. Boaz turns to the elders and declares, "You are witnesses that I have bought the land from Naomi. I received Ruth as my wife to continue the name of her former husband, so that his name is not forgotten from his family of his homeland." The elders, along with others who had gathered, say, "We are witnesses." They then bless Boaz, declaring, "May you be renowned in Bethlehem and have many children." Boaz then marries Ruth, and the Lord blesses them with a son. The women of the town say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, for he has not forgotten you and has not abandoned you. This son shall be a restorer of life and take care of you in old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, worth more than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Naomi embraces her grandson and cares for him. The women gather and name him Obed. This son became the father of Jesse, who fathers David, who becomes the king of Israel. This is where the book of Ruth ends. By the grace of God, this Moabite widow becomes the great, 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 great grandmother of Jesus.
So that's a lot of story captured in a couple of minutes. We're going to unpack some of that this morning. I'm excited to go through it with you. You have Ruth, you have Naomi, you have loss as Naomi. They've experienced loss. They're out of their homeland. They can't stay in Bethlehem. They go to Moab. She loses her husband. She then loses her boys. I mean, Naomi's in a situation where for her, she feels like all hope is lost. And I think as we read the story, we'd say, yeah, I mean, all hope is lost. I want you to think for a minute about your life. I want you to think about situations that you might say, a season of your life where you might say, I feel like all hope was lost. Does that come into mind? Maybe you have a situation in your family, maybe a situation with your finances, maybe a situation at work, a situation where you just look at it and you say, I think I'm done. I think we're done. I just don't see a way out. Well, that's where Ruth and Naomi are in the story that we're going to look at this morning. I mean, there just doesn't seem like a good way out, a good way forward. I was recently reading a story by a woman named Vanitha Randall Risner. She said this, and I wanted to share it with you. She said, several years ago, I was sinking into a dull depression. Life was gray. I cried, she said, at the slightest provocation, and sometimes with no provocation at all. I was falling into a black hole, and I felt powerless to stop my descent. So much of my life had disintegrated. My husband had left our family. Our children decided God wasn't real. They were angry and disillusioned, taking their frustration out at home. My health was spiraling downward, and I was struggling to even care for myself, let alone 2 adolescent daughters. I was at one of the lowest points in my life. While I had previously known a deep relationship with God, I was now struggling to believe that God loved me. My relentless pain had convinced me that my situation would never change. In short, I felt desperate. My friends tried to help me, she said, as best they could by bringing me food, praying with me, encouraging me to press on. I appreciated their efforts, but nonetheless, I still felt overwhelmed and discouraged. I didn't like discussing my problems because no one could understand my pain. Loved ones offered advice, but I couldn't receive it. One morning, I finally decided to tell a few friends how I was feeling. I didn't want to talk, but I knew that being encouraged by the saints was important. I didn't want to pull further away from fellowship and my ongoing grief. But soon after we started talking, she said I couldn't speak anymore. I felt foolish as I sat there crying. The comfort of friends, though well-meaning, felt empty. No one could fix this. I was wondering if even God could fix this. I don't know if you've been there in your life. When you look at your situation, maybe the situation of a close family member and say, how in the world is this going to get fixed? Because this just looks like a heaping mess. That's where Benitha, and that's where Ruth and Naomi are. And the beautiful thing I love about the story is that it includes stories of people like Ruth and Naomi, people who feel like, and we would agree, that hope seems lost. For Naomi, she had lost her husband. Now, you know I'm terrible at pronouncing Hebrew and Greek words, right? I just kind of West Texify all of them. And so Elimelech, his name means my God is king, but she lost her boy, Mahlon. His name means sick. That's an S name, Elia, if we're looking for an S name for our kid. And then and Kilion, which means pining, sick and pining. You may not like your name, but at least it's not sick and pining. But at this day and age, property was transferred through males. And without males, it was like this family just never existed. So not only is it sad, she's lost her husband, she's lost her boys, she's lost her safety net. There's nobody to provide, and there's no clear way forward. Maybe they could remarry, maybe Ruth could remarry, but she was also a foreigner. Maybe they could resort to begging. That was a highly likely option. Maybe they'd have to resort to prostitution. Maybe they would have to sell themselves into slavery. That was their option forward. That was the options as presented to them. But I want you to notice what happens, because the Bible includes stories like that, but that's not where this story ends. Ruth goes to glean in the fields. Now, like I mentioned, there weren't many social safety nets in this day and age, but one of them that was allowed was a practice called gleaning, where if you owned land, you could not harvest the entire field. You had to leave the edges, the leftovers, what fell out of the basket. You had to leave that for the poor. And so that's where Ruth is. She hears about this field. Naomi tells her about a field that belongs to a man named Boaz. He's actually a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's husband who had died. And so she goes to glean in the fields, and Ruth is noticed by Boaz. I want you to see Ruth's response. If you look in your Bible, it's in chapter 2, verse 10. It's a very powerful statement that Ruth says that I think we can learn a lot from. She says, at this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. This is Ruth. She asked him, talking to Boaz, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Ruth is an outsider. And when all hope is lost, she's noticed by this man named Boaz, a man of character, an upright man, a noble man. And we learn several things from the story, one of which is that when all hope is lost, we're noticed. When all hope is lost, we're noticed. You know, as a church, there's a lesson that all around us, church, we have people who feel like they've lost everything. There's people in this room, there's people sitting next to you who feel that way this morning. They may not have it written on their forehead. It may not be something that they're just advertising, but I promise you in your section this morning, in your Sunday school classes, there are Ruths all around you. All hope feels lost. It's evident in how they live, the practices they're living. Boaz noticed that she was gleaning, a practice of the poor, and he does something about it. Noticing people is one of the most powerful things we can do. One of the most powerful things we can do to make a difference in the kingdom of God, to make an eternal difference, is to notice people, to notice their need, to not just treat people as scenery and our self-centered story, but to stop and to say hi and to look someone in the eye and to give them time, our precious time, to give them our attention, to say, no, really, tell me, how are you doing? And you know, Ruth is surprised to be noticed. Did you catch that? What have I done to find such favor in your eyes that you would notice me, a foreigner? I mean, as I read that, I hear Ruth being surprised. I wonder why she was surprised. I wonder if Ruth was used to being ignored. I wonder if she was used to being ignored. I wonder if that's just what she accepted. because that's how she was treated. I wonder if Ruth was used to being shooed away. People thought her problems were just too complicated and complex, and they couldn't deal with her. I wonder if Ruth just felt like nobody would understand the struggle that she'd been through. After all, there had been other people that lived through a famine, and she wasn't the only one struggling. There were other poor people. I wonder why she was surprised. But you see, Ruth, not only was she noticed, but we see something, that God had much bigger plans for her. That Boaz, the man who owned the land where Ruth was, is actually what's called a kinsman redeemer. Now, what is that? Well, in the Old Testament law, if you look in the book of Leviticus, specifically chapter 25, you can read more about that. But the next of kin could actually come in and purchase the land and the family. The name of the family, the property of the family, would actually stay in the deceased's name. So it was a way for Elimelech's family line to continue on. And so Ruth and Naomi could have, through Boaz, a kinsman redeemer. They can't replace her family, it can't replace her husband, it can't replace her boys. But the family line could be provided for, and that social safety net that these women need could be provided for. And so Ruth goes to Boaz, and in the culture of their day, she goes and requests marriage. It's a very bold move that Ruth makes here in chapter 3, verse 9, but it was what you did, and it was her only hope. She said, I am your servant Ruth. She said, spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Ruth gives us an example that when we feel like all hope is lost, we've got to be bold and vulnerable. And that's what Ruth was. She was bold. She was vulnerable. We've got to let God know our need. We've got to let other people know our need. The word for garment is actually the same word that's used to refer to God's wing. It's a wing of protection. It's a wing of security. That we learn here that not only is Boaz, she's requesting Boaz to provide that security and protection, we also see that parallel that God is the one who wants to come alongside and provide that protection and security. That God is a God who notices our pain, that other people can notice our pain, but God is also a God who notices our pain, and God often uses people as his instruments to help us in our hurt. That God wants to be that wing of protection and security. God notices. When all hope is lost for you, maybe you feel that way this morning, we learn from this story that God is a God who notices. That God's going to put other people in your life to notice our loss. I want you to think for a moment about your life. I mentioned earlier for you to think about a situation where you feel like all hope was lost. And sure, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you've lost your spouse and you've lost your children. Some of you have. I've walked with you through that. Lost parents. It can be different degrees. We're not trying to compare stories here. We get it. But just a situation where all hope is lost. Okay? You got that in mind? And I want you to think about the people who helped you through that. Who noticed you? I think of people, sometimes parents, grandparents, friends, mentors who've walked with me, walked with Elia and me through different instances. Sometimes they've provided good perspective. Sometimes my perspective's been wrong, and they can provide good perspective. Sometimes they've used their resource to spread their wing over us, to provide security and protection. They've cared for us emotionally, physically. They've been a listening ear. They've spoken words of encouragement. They've shared meals with us. I think of people who've been there, who've noticed us. Well, Ruth has to be bold. Naomi, they have to be bold. They had to go and explicitly state, here's what we want. You see, it's hard for people to help when they don't know the need. It's hard for me to help as a pastor when we don't know the need. Ruth had to be vulnerable, just like the story we read earlier. She had to be vulnerable and go to her friends. When all hope is lost, you've got to be bold. You've got to be vulnerable. It's challenging. It's difficult. But let God know the need. Not that God doesn't already know the need, but it's important to pour that out to God and then pour that out to other people. You can't do it alone. If you try to do it alone, you'll fail on your own. We were never meant to live this life alone. You need other people. You need other people you can go to and say, hey, things aren't right. Things aren't well. Here's what's going on. Can you help me? Can you pray for me? I need something. And maybe I don't even know what I need. Maybe I just need to tell the story again. Maybe I need to tell it for the 50th time. I just need somebody to talk to. That's important. So Ruth does that. And then if you go to chapter 4, Boaz is a noble man. He sees the need of Ruth, but there's another twist in the story. There's actually another family member that's closer, and he ought to be the one that redeems this family. He has first option to be the kinsman redeemer. And Boaz goes to meet this man, and at first the man says yes. Now, I don't know if you have a friend that likes to call you up and just say, hey, do you have any plans on Friday night, Nathan Adams? And they don't tell you what it is. They just tell you yes or no, and you'd say yes or no, and they say, okay, well, here's what you're going to do. Here's what we're going to do, and it's something you don't want to do. Not that Nathan would ever do that, but that, you know what I'm saying? That's what happens here. That's what happens here. They call it out. They say, here's what's going to happen. You're going to, oh, by the way, you're going to get a wife. And at that point, the man's out. He says, nope, I can't redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. And there are too many jokes to make that are way too easy, and I'm not going to do that. But this family member, when he learns that this is going to affect his estate, his pocketbook, he passes on Ruth. He notices the need. He doesn't do anything about the need. He notices the need, but he doesn't do anything about the need. You ever turn your neck when you see human suffering? When you see someone hurting? Maybe you don't think you have what it takes. Maybe you don't, well, I just don't have the time today to deal with this. I don't have the energy. You know what? There's an expert at the church. And I bet if I can get them to the expert at the church, they can help. I don't have the know-how. I don't have the time. I don't, how's this going to affect my reputation? I help this person. Am I going to now get 50 other people to help? I can't help everybody, so I don't help anybody. What's this going to look like on Instagram and Facebook when I'm photoed with these people? What's that going to do for my reputation? You know what? I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to just turn the other way and act like I didn't see it, and surely God will understand. This man notices the need. He doesn't do anything about the need. You know, in the New Testament, the writer of the book of James says this. He said, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. You know the right thing to do. You don't do it. It's sin. This other family member fails. Now, Boaz, on the other hand, he turns outward. He sees the need of Ruth. He sees the need of the foreigner. And he does something about it. You know, Paul says in Philippians 2, this is but what Boaz does. He says, do nothing, Paul says, out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves. How does that line radically change our church, our culture, our country, our world? Value other people above yourself. Don't look out to your own interests, but each of you look to the interests of others. That's Boaz. That's what he's doing. He knows it's going to cost him his time, his treasure, his talent, and he still does it. It was Bob Goff, he's the author of Love Does. He said, love isn't something we fall into. Love is someone we become. Love's not an accident. Oh, whoops, fell into love. It's a choice. It's a verb. It's an action. And that's what Boaz is. He's a man of action. And so Boaz then stands up and says, today you are witnesses that I've bought this family, the land. I've acquired Ruth the Moabite. The name's going to go on. You can read in chapter 4 about that. He says, today you are witnesses. But Boaz doesn't just fall into this. He intentionally chooses to notice the need, to meet the need, to help someone in need. And so when all hope is lost, help can come from unexpected people and places. God can use all kinds of people to bless us and to be a part of our lives. Now, what's interesting is that Boaz was actually an outsider too. Okay? His mother, Rahab, was a prostitute. She was also a foreigner, an Amorite. And so Boaz knew what it was like to be an outsider. And he also reached out to somebody else who was an outsider. And you say, Pastor, why are you being political? I'm not being political. I'm just reading what the text says, okay? And you look in the Bible, it's all over of God using people outside to bring them a part of his story to bless the world. That's just how God works. So now I want you to think for a moment about a time when you met the need of somebody who was hurting. Think about that time when you were the one offering the help. What did that feel like to help them? What did it take to do that? What did you do? Think about that. And then you start thinking, okay, what's stopping me from doing that again? Maybe there's a need in your life that you have the ability to meet today, maybe tomorrow. Maybe you don't know the need yet. But God's going to use you tomorrow or today to put love into action in somebody else's life. But you see, there's also something else we can learn from this story. And that sometimes when all hope is lost, God can reveal a grander purpose for our life. When all hope is lost, God can reveal a grander purpose for our life. If this were a Hollywood story, imagine this for a moment. You'd see Naomi and Elimelech in Bethlehem. Life is good. The famine hits, and so what are we going to do? Well, we hear there's food in Moab. We're going to go to Moab. So they go to Moab. And then when they're in Moab, things start to get really dark and gloomy. Her husband dies, and we'd see the funeral, and we'd see the casket, and we'd see people in tears. And then it would get even worse with her boys dying. And then it would be left with this woman who was worn, her face worn by her grief and tears that have poured out of her soul, would be going back to Bethlehem, and she'd walk back to Bethlehem, and she'd see her friends, and they'd say, she says, "Call me bitter." I mean, she's just had experienced a lot in life. And then the story would start to take an upswing as there's this plan with Boaz and this kinsman redeemer. And then the story would include the wedding of Ruth and Boaz. And then you would see in chapter 4, at the very end of the movie, I would imagine you'd see a scene where Naomi's in a rocking chair, and in her arms is a beautiful baby. The baby of Ruth and Boaz. And it would zoom in on her face that's now lit up again, full of joy, as she smiles and sings to that sweet baby. And the camera would start to zoom out. And as the camera zooms out, you would start to see subtitles come in. And you would see that Ruth and Boaz have a son, and his name is Obed. And Boaz is the father of Obed, and Obed is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David. And chills would start to go up your spine as you see how all of this worked for a grander purpose. And then 28 generations later, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, is born through this lineage, that God, through their suffering, revealed a grander purpose for their life. And as the movie ends, you'd be walking out of the theater thinking about, if you were a Jewish person hearing this, God using an outsider to be a part of the lineage of the Messiah. You would think about Boaz being this instrument that God uses and wants to provide blessing to people. You would think about God ultimately being the hero of the story, because no human could have concocted this plan. This was God's story, that God was not finished with this family. What a wonderful story. This morning, I want you to hear the story of two of my good friends, Micah and Kim Clay. Micah is a coach at Craig Middle School. Kim's a teacher at Taylor Elementary. They have two children, Hudson and Madeline, and they've been a member here at Pioneer Drive for about 5 years. They teach our young professional Sunday school class. They greet here at the gathering. They do just about everything, pretty much. And I'm going to ask them to just walk us through the past couple of years. And Micah and I like to go back and forth on the Rangers and the Astros. So no, I'm not talking about the past couple of great seasons that we've had and the not so great ones that y'all have had. I'm just talking about y'all's journey. We're just going to talk about y'all's journey and not that journey for just a little bit. We can't ever get a conversation without that, but we're going to try up here from here on out after I get the last word. But Micah, tell us a little bit about your story and where y'all have been.
In 2014, we had our son, Hudson. And shortly after that, we, in that stage of life, felt the desire to have another child. And so we prayed about that, and we felt that was, on the forefront of our minds, and we were able and ready to parent another child. But we ran into a season of hopelessness. Trying after doctor's visits and procedures and tests, we were given the diagnosis of unexplained infertility. And being a man and trying to fix things, there's nothing I can do physically, spiritually. I can't fix that season. Moving forward, we were finally blessed to know that we were going to have a child. And again, in the midst of hopelessness during the sonograms, there was health concerns for our child. And again, not being able to do anything or fix anything leaves you hopeless. But after she was born, she was healthy, okay. And then again, some unforeseen issues with her digestive system left us at Cook's in Fort Worth, again feeling hopeless as a dad because we couldn't do anything. And that's where the church became our Boaz.
And Mike, I know for y'all, because that took you about 2 minutes to explain, and it took you about 4 years to live. And I know that journey wasn't an easy one. I know it had ups and downs and excitement and disappointment and all the above, because we walked with y'all as y'all were facing that. Kim, what was that like as far as, how did God notice y'all? How did he use other people to notice what you were going through?
During those years, the Lord just used people in this church to truly be the hands and feet of Jesus in a way that I had never experienced in my life before I grew up in church, but it just took on a whole new meaning for me at that time. People truly carried us as a family. From the beginning, Katie Hibbs got up here 4 years ago and poured out her heart and her story, and we had coffee shortly thereafter, and her story became such a big part of my story, and she chose to walk beside me and love me in times that were really hard, in the waiting, our Sunday school class praying for us, and our small group praying for us and encouraging us and lifting us up in times where we just felt really dark, to my if table group. God placing specific people in there who had walked the same walk that I had walked and who could talk to me and give me hope. To once we found out we were going to have a baby, to people being joyful in that season and continuing to pray for us. And even when my water broke at 34 weeks, I think within 30 minutes I had many friends just come in that room and cry with me and encourage me. And then when the news came we were going to Cook's, it took minutes. And I had people that I didn't even know from this church walk up to me in that NICU and just say, I'm praying for you, and it's going to be okay. And it was just incredible to look back and see how people in this church truly cared for us and made their story part of our story.
Yeah, I think you can see that, helping people in need is as simple as helping the people who are in your groups and who are right around you, who those prayer requests that we share every week in many of our groups that we're a part of. That's where we can help. That's where we can walk alongside, and that's certainly what we're able to do. But, what y'all did is y'all didn't just hold that to yourself. Y'all were vulnerable. Y'all were bold. Y'all let other people in on that. And I know as a church, that's what we want to be here for. That's why we do this, is to help each other. And if we all play our cards really close, we don't ever get to be that for each other. And so, I'm thankful that Mike and Kim shared their journey with us, and then getting to see Madeline up here this morning and getting to hear her talk and alert and as healthy and happy as she can be is pretty awesome. Tell us a little bit, Micah, how did you're now 6 months, she's, 8 months old, she's getting older, getting big. What grander purpose did this serve?
Sure. After we got home, we got the kids to bed, we were sitting there thinking, is this it? After all of the hopelessness, the seasons of struggle, is this it? And so I kind of likened it to reading a book. You don't just read half the book and then you're done. I think part of the struggle is overcoming the struggle and then completing the second part of the book, bringing it full circle. And that's where the grander purpose for us was to use the struggle, to use that experience to help bear the burden of others that are going through similar situations. And we've had an opportunity with close friends here shortly that we've been able to use our experience to bring hope to their hopelessness. And so being a part of the story is bringing hope to them.
Yeah, and I often spend time at night just when I'm rocking Madeline to sleep, and I just tell her story. She can't really talk back to me yet, but I often start at the beginning, and I just tell her a story. And I talk about so many people in this room and how much they loved her even before she was formed. And I can't wait to share that with her. And I'm so thankful that I have that visual representation of God's love and this church's love for our family. And so my encouragement is to you is just to let your story be something to people. everybody in here has a story. Everyone in here has had struggles, and they're no greater or smaller than anyone else's. And so find somebody and walk with them, because it was truly life-changing for our family.
Thank y'all. Let's thank them for sharing their story. Because as a church, as a pastor, one of the marks I think of healthy disciples is that we go through our trials well. Doesn't mean we all go through them successful. It doesn't mean they all end up how we want them, but that we go through our trials well. And I'm thankful to Mike and Kim for sharing their story with us this morning. I opened with Vanessa's story, and I was struck as she concluded that story that I read. She said, I envisioned, I lost her husband, she'd lost her children, and the relationship she had with them. But she said, one of my friends challenged me with the scene of Jesus. He's on the cross, and his friends and family are there. And when his friends and family are there, they don't know that Easter is coming. But she said, I know, as a follower of Jesus, that Easter's coming. And our story may not have a bow on it. And truth be told, this side of heaven, it may not get a bow on it, if we're faithful to the biblical text of what we see in faith. That our suffering and our tears may go on a little bit longer, or tomorrow we may rock a new baby. Even so, God's still God, and God's going to walk with us through it. And God's going to notice our pain, and God's going to allow that to be used for a greater purpose. Not that that's God's will that we suffer, because suffering is from the evil one who comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. Sure, God allows suffering. That's a part of God's permissible will. It doesn't mean it's part of his perfect will. And so we as a church, we come together and we realize that Easter is coming. Easter has come. And Jesus is going to come again. And that our story is not over, that God is a God who brings beauty from the ashes. And so you may not have the bow on your story. You may have a family member who doesn't have the bow on their story yet. But the promise of Scripture is that Jesus is coming again. That God notices our pain, that God's going to be there to carry our burden, but that he's going to send the people on this campus, the people a part of Pioneer Drive, the people a part of the church, to carry that burden. So church, let's notice the pain of others. Let's let our pain be seen and know that God has acted and God's going to act again. Let's pray. God, we thank you that your story includes people who've lost it all. And we thank you that you notice those people. You care for them. So for those of us who feel like this morning we've lost it all, may we know that you know and you care. And there's other people in this church that want to notice and care as well. So I pray that today they'd be bold, that they'd let somebody know the need, that they'd come forward for prayer, or that they'd fill out a prayer card and drop it in the box, that they'd come see us at the Welcome Center, that they'd call us this week and let us know, or email their Sunday school class. Let them know what's going on. And Lord, for those of us who maybe life's just great right now, and we're just flying through, and we're ready for the next exciting thing, and kind of in our own world, help us, Lord, to notice the Ruths and Naomis around us, to notice the need and do the right thing. And Lord, I thank you for this church, for the power that's here, to go through our trials together, for people like Micah and Kim who share their story, and let that be an example to others of how to go through trial with the church and how we can really rally together in that time. Help us to be that kind of church that doesn't kick their own when they're down, doesn't ignore their own when they're down, but rallies around and encourages and loves and supports. It's in the name of Jesus that we offer our prayer. Amen.